Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wellbeing at Work, a Workplace Options podcast. I'm Ryan Arruda, a global marketing and communications intern here at WPO.
And I'm Emma Goldstein, an internal communications intern.
And today, we're pleased to be joined by Dr. Kennette Thigpen Harris, Chief Clinical Officer at WPO, to discuss COVID's enduring impact on the workplace, particularly Gen Z's entrance into the workplace, and what these changes mean for the future of work. So let's get started. Dr. Kennette, if you wouldn't mind, taking us through, you as a leader in this field and you as a professional, like a little bio about yourself.
Yeah, certainly. So, Dr. Kennette Thigpen Harris, I'm currently the Chief Clinical Officer here at Workplace Options. I've been with the company for a little over 12 years, based in our corporate headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina. I've been in several different clinical leadership positions since my tenure with WPO, but some of my past experience includes private practice consulting. I do a lot of speaking and training for organizations. And then prior to that life, I worked for the Department of Juvenile Justice, Child Protective Services, and also did a lot of work with community mental health. So mental health is kind of my baby. That's my background. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an international psychologist. And of course, mental health is one of the things that are near and dear to my heart. And the more people I can impact, the better off the world would be, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that, that last little mission statement is, I think, something that resonates with me and Emma and many members of our generation is making that impact. So thank you again for joining us and welcome. So
thank you.
Let's begin. So from your perspective, what were the most significant changes COVID brought to the modern workplace?
Well, let me tell you, pre-COVID, the workplace was, it was just a place. I would say that workplace was just a place. But I would say post-COVID, work has become more of a state of being. One of the most significant shifts I saw was the blurring of boundaries, where I don't know if you guys remember, but the kitchen table became my conference room when we first transitioned to the COVID environment. I believe that, my pajamas kind of became my uniform. It was kind of like pajamas on the bottom, a little semi-professional on the top. And so that became part of the whole COVID transition. And for many of us, I think the line between being on and being off was completely blurred and really disappeared, where people really weren't sure, like, where does my individual life start and end? And really, where does work start and end? What I would say from a mental health lens is that things changed everything. The pandemic didn't, create stress in the workplace. It just really revealed just how unwell we already were and how much we had ignored the need for help and psychological safety in the workplace. So I think a lot of times people say, the COVID kind of was the catalyst for mental health, but mental health has always been there. It's just, I feel like we have been too silent, too quiet about it for far too long. And COVID is really what exacerbated it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I was a freshman in high school when COVID first hit, and just the initial first response from our school district specifically, they just had no idea what to do and didn't really have the tools to help all of their students that were in different situations, because obviously we're not all in the same bracket of life. But how did companies initially respond to the crisis, and what have you noticed any long-term effects that's had on responses in workplace culture? Because it definitely once coming back from COVID and high school and everything, all of our teachers put a much greater emphasis on making sure we were all okay.
Wow, I love that, to hear that teachers put more emphasis on that when you came back. I think we really saw a variety of things from companies who were a little more prepared or a lot more prepared than other companies, depending on what industry it was. Of course, it didn't work out for everyone. But when the world shut down, most companies really went into survival mode. The smart ones, like WPO, they shifted into more so of a human mode. initially there was a rush to figure it out. Like, how do we get people connected to the phone lines? How do we get people set up? How will meetings happen? And so a lot of it went to like virtual meetings, crisis communication, and of course, do we want to implement mental health support? And I think some companies did. Now, but what really stood out for companies was the ones who really led with empathy. Like, I think we don't give empathy enough credit, but the companies who really led with that empathetic support, much like you were saying, Emma, with your teachers really checking in, like, how are you doing, are the ones who made it. And it wasn't just about, like, how are you, but it was really asking, no, for real, like, how are you really doing? So it wasn't no more of this, like, we're just asking to be asking, but really trying to figure it out. But in addition to that, it was really about implementing robust well-being solutions that were meaningful for individuals. So it wasn't like, oh, we checked the box, this one thing is done, yay. But people really wanted to know and to see and to feel that there were really solutions that were meaningful for them. Now, what I would say, Emma and Ryan, the long term effect is really about that cultural shift toward a well-being strategy, not as, again, a one size, one and done situation, which is what we saw a lot of. Of course, you have, mental health month or stress awareness month, and we do something for that. And we're like, oh my goodness, we did the big thing. But then it was like, no, 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 we need like a long-term strategy. It needs to be embedded into the DNA of organizations or schools, like kind of like you experienced, Emma, during, because that was that time for you, but it needs to be like embedded into that particular piece. The workforce is demanding more. It's more than just a paycheck for people. It's about, I want to feel purpose. I want to have flexibility. And I want proof that mental health really matters. Like, it's not like, don't just talk about it, be about it. The companies that embrace the shift early are the ones who I believe are truly keeping and retaining talent.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense because when you're looking at companies and looking at these educational institutions, people are more likely to stay if they're implementing those standards prior to when, the quote unquote storm hits. It's good to stay reactive at those times, but it's also good to make sure that you're proactive in case something like that were to come. And like Emma had said, I completely agree with that, is that standard definitely increased following COVID. Now, before you mentioned the, emotional side shift, you mentioned kind of that workplace shift, which was how companies like WPO, and WPO has that golden standard, is they moved directly to that hybrid model with those online calls. And even today, we're joined together on Teams, and a lot of, Emma and I are URI students, but a lot of our advising things for the University of Rhode Island, some of them are in office, but most tend to stay on Zoom. So do you think that this, remote and hybrid work model is here to stay? And what would you say are the pros and cons that you've seen through these models?
Oh, this is such a great question. And I feel like it's like the great debate. I feel like every conference that I go to, this hybrid conversation comes up. People are still wanting to know, like, what is your company doing? What is your company doing? What have you seen out there? And to be honest, I'm seeing a little bit of everything because it truly is not a one size fit all strategy. But yes, I do think hybrid models for certain companies where it works for them, it will stay. It may not be, again, the perfect situation for all companies, all industries, and I get that, but it's definitely not going anywhere. I would say that the pros are, people get to experience a better work-life balance, or what I like to say, work-life integration, more autonomy. And believe it or not, I do think people are more productive. And I think people are pretty honest about if they're not as productive working from home versus in office. They typically say that because I know some people who they have the honor of working, so many days home versus in office, but they're like, you know what? I'm just not productive at home. I have all these other things in my way that I cannot focus. And so I know to be productive, I need to go into the office. Because again, at the end of the day, you have to produce something, you have to be productive. So I think companies, it's definitely here to stay. I do think those are some of the pros. But likewise, Ryan and Emma, I do think we definitely see some cons to it when it comes to maybe, some isolation for individuals. Zoom fatigue is real. Let's just be honest, be honest. You're in meetings, virtual, behind the screen, back to back to back to back. And to be honest, even when I'm in the office, I'm in the room with my door shut, with the camera on, and meetings back to back to back. So that Zoom fatigue really does it's real, it's there, it's present. And then with that all, I think that it does create some disconnection for individuals. I've worked with clients who feel like they're working in a vacuum, performing but not belonging. And when you think about psychological safety, one of the key principles is the sense of belonging. And so it's finding that balance of how do we continue to in this hybrid work model where people still feel connected and belonging. And so that's the piece that we have to be very intentional about creating connection, culture, and community for people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think fostering like a sense of community for each individual person is like extremely important. But changing the subject over to more focus on what our podcast is about, we're going to talk a little bit more about Gen Z in the workforce.
Okay.
So, Gen Z entered the workforce during or like just after the pandemic. That's when like I feel like our generation really started to be like implemented into the whole environment. So, how do you think this timing has shaped our expectations and habits and values at work? Like, do you think it like largely differs from older generations, or do you think it's like kind of the same?
Interesting question. And I love Gen Zers. My niece, she's a Gen Zer. And so I'm so glad you guys are doing this podcast. And as I was saying before we kind of went live, that as I was preparing for this, I was thinking of my niece as a Gen Z. But what I was thinking was like, imagine your very first job. That's a whole thing in of itself. But now imagine your very first job and it's during a pandemic, behind a screen, probably wearing these sweatpants and muting yourself off and on, telling people you're muted, I can't hear you. And so that's the Gen Z's baseline for the most part. Gen Zers, they enter the workforce in a time of global grief and a lot of uncertainty. And when things are uncertainty, that's already a challenging place to be in. So naturally, I think the values are different. Our Gen Zers expect flexibility. And I would love to hear what you guys think about this, but I think as Gen Zers, they do expect that flexibility. And it's not like, oh, this is a perk. Like, thank you so much that you allowed me this flexibility, but it's a given. Like we need this. I feel like Gen Zers are really prioritizing mental health. Inclusion is important, and having that sense of purpose. So I just don't want to do a job, but I want to do a job that I'm passionate about and is aligned with my purpose. So Gen Z is here to build a life that really works for them. And honestly, that's not entitlement because I feel like we often hear, oh, Gen Zers are so entitled. So I don't think it's about entitlement. I think it's about evolution. And I'm curious to hear your input on that.
Yeah, I think that Gen Z is this kind of with this midway generation, and I mean I know we've discussed COVID, but we were born into the world at a very, very different time than others. You have people of other generations. They're coming in during maybe global conflicts, but the early 2000s was definitely a very active global period, and Gen Z was kind of plopped right in. So there were other events that happened during this time that had already affected our generation the way we see things. I mean, even TSA at airports, I have conversations with my parents and they're like, the airports were so different back then, and it's like, you say that to a member of Gen Z and we can't even begin to imagine that. So I think that, Gen Z, and I mean, this was not a question that we had, but I'd like your insight, Dr. Kennette. Gen Z is kind of this generation and I want to see if you agree with this, but we're the kind of generation that has to almost constantly rewrite our paths and our stories. So, I mean, do you agree with that? I mean, that TSA example, the COVID example, I mean, the constant things that are going on in our generation, I feel like these other generations kind of had this plan, and for the most part, I feel as if they are able to continue to follow them, especially if they're in that, long-term job position. But Gen Z, we're entering and we're already, oh, no, can't have that. Oh, that's a restriction. That's that. So I'd like to insight into that.
Yeah, I think I love how you said we're constantly having to rewrite, how you do life or your narrative and stories. And that's absolutely right. Because when I think about all of the changes and uncertainties that have been before you, you do have to, because what you think is happening it's not the reality. Like Emma, you said when COVID hit, you were still in high school. So did you probably didn't even have a graduate, like a normal graduation, or by that time were we out of the COVID period where you were able to have?
By that time, I graduated in 2023. So
Okay.
our graduation, everything my senior year was completely normal. Like everything
Okay.
had gone back to normal. But when I was still a junior, like we were still wearing masks like the first half of the year. Like school didn't go back to normal till the second half of my junior year, which was really weird.
I'm in
Oh,
that boat too. And actually,
yeah.
to speak to that, my sister was one of the 2020 graduates. So that
Oh,
was that was that
Yeah.
class. Just, you
My
know,
cousin graduated college in 2020 and she like
oh, wow.
didn't have a graduation.
See, like it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around that because again, like you were saying, Ryan, it was different for us, and so probably what you guys thought was going to happen was completely different. So you did have to rewrite what life was going to be like, and I think it's kind of continued because you guys were hit with one thing after another after another. But I think the adaptability that Gen Zers have is phenomenal.
yeah. And I mean, fortunately that we have so many already, whether it be on social media or in person, we already have leaders that are kind of guiding Gen Z in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that adaptability is just something that long run is going to be more beneficial for Gen Z.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
to
I am curious. Oh, I'm sorry.
no, please go
No,
ahead.
I was just gonna say the word entitlement, I feel like often comes up when talking about Gen Zers. And I know I touched on it that I don't think it's necessarily entitlement, but more so evolution. Do you guys feel like that word entitlement is often associated with Gen Zers, and how do we change that narrative?
Yeah, I think that's like also like one of the main reasons we were like so excited about making this podcast, because I feel like there's a lot of like misconstrued, I guess, stereotypes about our
Mm-hmm.
generation. It's not that like we're lazy or we're not putting our best foot forward. It's that like we're just gonna match your energy, and if you're like not providing us with like the proper environment that we know we deserve, then like why would we like
Yeah.
give you more than we have to? And like also it's not that we think that we're better than you. We want to learn. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's all that's really going on. It's just that like when no one sees the fact that like we are actually trying to learn, they just like don't care.
Oh,
In a sense.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that entitlement kind of stems from where we are in this generational line.
Mm-hmm.
My parents are part of Gen X, and
Okay.
I've always kind of viewed that generation as the generation that had to take care of their parents and their children.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, I know that it always ends up being like that, but it just felt like that generation is more pronounced. You had, the people before, I mean, what are known as, boomers and the silent generation, where that mentality at the time was very, like you can take care of yourself kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the people that they're able to survive on their own. But Gen X is this generation where, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of, global changes, but they're the ones that had to help their aging parents, but also by the time the birth rate was increasing across the world, they had to take care of their own children. So I think the entitlement stems from the fact that it's possible that people may see Gen Z as, kids that are like leeching onto their parents, like the parents
Mm-hmm.
were, you hear words like, trust fund kids
Yes.
or, other things like that. But I can tell you for a fact that my parents, they work so dearly hard to support their lifestyle, but also to support us. And I think there are some cases, but it's not, the word entitlement, it's really not entitled. I think it's more of a fortunate thing, not for us, but for our parents, because
Yeah.
they're the people that are working to lay this foundation to make sure that we are able to get ahead.
Oh, I love that. Shout out to the parents, Ryan.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
true.
all the props to the parents. Yes.
Whoop, whoop.
But yeah, so I think, it's that's a thing that Gen Z is the hallmark of, is us trying to, we're trying to prove ourselves and show other people that we are here and we are willing to work, and that we're maybe not entitled but fortunate to get to this point.
Yes.
And now we're ready to lead. So
I love it. I love it. I'm here to support it all. So whatever help you guys need, give me a shout. Let me know.
Thank
Perfect.
you. We appreciate it.
So, yeah, go ahead,
Here you
Emma. So, we're kind of talking about, I just left off on Gen Z becoming that leader in the workforce, but some people say that Gen Z is less prepared for professionalism due to that disrupt in education, in things like internships that may be online or people that are not getting that accurate work. What's your take on that, Dr. Kennette?
I think it really starts with let's just redefine professionalism. I think sometimes we get stuck in these older ways, but let's just start with redefining professionalism because if we mean like rigid dress codes and being silent in meetings and pretending that everything's fine, maybe like you saying our parents have done, Gen Z is challenging that. And you know what? I'm here for it, and rightfully so. Um, Gen Zers, they may not have the same access to, the internships that we had or the in-person training that we did. But let me tell you, when it becomes to being like digitally fluent, socially aware, and emotionally tuned in, like on spot, that's the kind of intelligence that we so desperately need in the workforce. What they may lack in maybe our traditional professionalism of being polished per se, Gen Zers definitely make up for it in being adaptable. And we talked about that a few minutes ago. And also offering like a super fresh perspective. And so I think here, Ryan, the real question is, are we preparing the workplaces for Gen Zers? Because the future doesn't need another copy or the same old things that we've been doing. So I think professionalism maybe needs to be redefined because it has been redefined. I think COVID helped in doing that. And so, what is that new definition of professionalism? And just because it's not the old stale version of it doesn't mean it's right. And so, let's look at a new definition of it. Again, we need the Gen Zers, again, their fresh perspective, the digital fluency, and again, just being socially aware.
Yeah, I totally sorry.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think Emma, you can take the lead, but yeah, I just completely agree.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of things within the workplace have had to be reshaped, not only like since the pandemic, but just with this new generation with like completely different set of eyes than everyone else has. I think a lot of things have had to be like kind of taken apart and put back together, but like with the help and the insight from not just the people that have been there forever, but just also from the people that are new to it and like know what the next generation of individuals like need within like starting their professional careers, along with like the reshape around the workforce in general. The pandemic, I feel like, also reshaped a lot of conversations about mental health within the workplace, especially for younger employees. Can you just like tell us a little bit about what you've noticed about that and your perspective on it?
Yeah. So I would say before the pandemic, mental health was one of those things that was like whispered or probably not even talked about. Now, for some people, it's on the meeting agenda. And to be fair, I believe that Gen Zers help put it there like, wait, hold up, wait a minute, let's talk about it. So I can appreciate that as a person who's so passionate about mental health. But the pandemic was really about pulling the curtain back. It showed us that, no one, despite your job title, despite your industry, despite your tenure, is immune to having mental health challenges. And our younger employees, especially our Gen Zers, they brought about that bold conversation and they didn't just say, okay, I want support or I need support, but it's like, we expect this support. And I think that expectation is really shifting the workplace culture, empowering through and having people really check in. And again, not the fake check in, like, how are you doing? But really, I want to know how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you need? And here I think sometimes it's less about the resilience as is a badge of honor, but more about sustainable performance. And that's a good thing for everyone, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that ability to, take on something like that is, it's necessary in the workplace. But to, keep on with Gen Z and this future road ahead for them, if you had one piece of advice for the members of Gen Z as they continue shaping the future of work, redefining it, and taking on these new tasks? What would it be?
I would say, okay, my advice would be don't compare your beginning to someone else's middle, because you're comparing two different generations, two different completely perspectives. Um, so I would start there by saying that. I think it's so important to be true to who you are and know who you are. And part of doing that is finding your own rhythm, and not moving at somebody else's pace. So whatever that rhythm is, find it, move to it, change it up as you need to. Use your voice, ask questions, set boundaries, seek feedback. Because even when I think about that for me, like, I wish I would have learned to set boundaries a lot earlier in life. I learned the hard way. I won't get into that story, but I think Gen Zers are really good about saying, like, these are the boundaries. Like, I'm giving you my work. I'm giving you 130% while I'm here, but this is that boundary. And yes, there may be some exceptions that come up from time to time, but I'm staying, really true to who I am. And just continue to normalize that support, whether it's therapy, mentoring, is all part of the process. And it's not, again, a nice to have, but it's essential to have.
Hmm. And like kind of going off like what we can do for ourselves, how do you think that like older employers should like adapt their strategies to better support young professionals that are like entering this like ever-changing work landscape?
I think, listen, I think we can learn so much by listening and asking questions. And that's part of really what psychological safety is really being able to create those environments where people can, one, feel safe to speak up, but they can share the good, bad, and ugly, whether it's ideals or whether things that they don't feel like is going completely the right way. But I think if we can sit down long enough to listen versus speaking, I think that we will be in a much better place.
Yeah. And if I could just go back for a second, Dr. Kennette, I think the question before the beginning of that, don't compare yourself to your beginning to someone else's middle. I mean,
Hmm.
like that, I think that hits. I mean, it definitely hit me, and I've been, like running through that, but it hits a lot of members of our generation because we look on social media, or we look, I search Google for actors and actresses. I'm like, oh my God, that's a 20-year-old. Like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? I could have been in Hollywood right now. I could be a business leader. We see so many young professionals already. And I know we are working to redefine that word professional, but we see so many people already like leading this generation. And, we're still in school, for example. So I think that along with that open communication among people, um, and your insight obviously would be extremely valuable on this, but having older generations kind of reinstate Gen Z, letting them know, this was just the beginning. There was more to come, and like this is just the start.
Yeah. I love that. It's absolutely, I think it's just the start. And part of that conversation is about how do we create that meaning, with one another, but also that mentorship with one another, to have those conversations. And again, I think it goes back to understanding, like, what are you thinking, what are you feeling, what do you see, what can we do differently, what's working, what's not working, but having that space to truly, share those questions. And I think one thing I love about WPO is, for example, the pitch it program, and not that you have to wait for a pitch it to pitch an idea, but again, we've had such great ideas that have come out of the pitch it, where people are like, you know what, this is something where I see as a gap that I think we can implement, or I think this is a way that we can improve a process, let's kind of chat about it. And so I think we just need to continue to create spaces and places for Gen Zers, and older generations to kind of come together and have these conversations just to improve. Because at the end of the day, our mission is the same. Depending on whatever workforce people are in, there's one goal for that particular company, and how we get there may not be one exact way, but I think listening to several people, we can get to that end goal.
Yeah. And again, having that structure and way through is just completely helped out by that open communication. And
Um,
even what you mentioned before, just it's as easy as just listening,
yes.
and and it goes back, like, and that's what I love about this conversation, is that everything that we mentioned ties into everything else. The listening not only is for ideas and for supporting people to another position, but it's also the emotional background of it. It's staying more empathetic. It's putting yourself in other people's shoes. So, I mean, we were so fortunate to have you today, because this discussion really does show that, Gen Z, we are a generation that's here and we're made our own way and we are very malleable, but we're all open to listening, to be more empathetic, and to support others to, reach the goals, no matter any generational boundary.
Yeah.
And I would say to that, both Emma and Ryan, I know they're saying like, Gen Z is the future of work. And what I would say is that you're not the future of work, you're already leading it. And I think this is a great example by doing this particular podcast. So kudos to each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
This has been a great discussion. Thank you, Dr. Kennette, for joining us today. And thanks to all of you for tuning in.
Please stay tuned in for next week's episode, when we'll be joined by WPO's President and CEO, Alan King, for an insightful conversation about cross-generational dynamics in the workplace and what Gen Z's growing presence means for those interactions.
Until next time, thanks for listening and take care.